Okay, here's another. It's the recently published It Just Occurred to Me, The Thoughts and Reminiscences of Chairman Humph. Can you guess some of my rejected first lines? Tim.
The war was over, I was demobbed, and Napoleon had gone into exile.
We made a film about Humphrey Lyttleton when he was 85, a year before he died. He was still spry, funny, humorous, delighted at the fact that the Sunday Times had described his performances on I'm Sorry I Haven't a Clue as delivering blue chip filth to Middle England. He's very pleased about that. I did a lot of the interview with him in Eton. He went to Eton School. His father was a teacher there. He said he'd had a very good time there. There's no reason to doubt him. He seemed to have enjoyed everything, including one horrible beating he got from bullying sixth form or whatever they have at Eton, who were allowed to beat younger children in those days. And he said he showed off his wounds on that particular part of anatomy with enormous pride. And that's the way he bounced his way through life, on the surface, of course. He became intoxicated by jazz. He nipped away from watching Eton play Harrow at Lord's to buy his first trumpet. And when Louis Armstrong pointed him out, when Armstrong came on a tour of England as this man, Humphrey Lyttleton, who could really play a trumpet, he was flattered massively. Who wouldn't be? And lauded Armstrong and pointed out Armstrong's virtues until the end of his life.
According to my guide notes, Eton's most famous former pupils include the Duke of Wellington, William Gladstone, George Orwell, and Humphrey Lyttleton, the jazz musician and panel game host. They don't say what those other three are famous for. Quite interesting to find how many memories come back, because Eton had a tradition, like a great many of the public schools, of having its own language. The masters were beaks and all those things like that. And sometimes when I meet fellow old Etonians of my generation, I'm completely flummoxed because I've forgotten all that. And they start talking to me, you know, were you up to somebody or other? Which means, were you taught by somebody? You know, I was up to your father, they say. You have to make a little mental adjustment to find out what they're talking about.
Cyril Connolly, one of many, many, many old Etonians who've written about Eton, spoke of it in terms of such a wonderful place, such a wonderful experience, that nothing in life really matched it ever again. Do you feel anything like that?
Not at all, because I've always been aware of a danger of becoming a professional old Etonian. And it's always seemed to me slightly sad that relatives who have been bigwigs at Eton and subsequent life has never quite lived up to that, which I think you must be very depressing.
Because you were a master's son, you were educated for next to nothing here. Your family was living here, as well as you being a boarder here in another house, as it were. Did those two things rub up against each other in a way that caused a bit of friction?
I don't think so, really. The only thing I found was, because of course when I went back to school, people were coming back to school from Caithness and all over the shop. My coming back to school was walking 400 or 500 yards from where we lived, accompanied by an odd job man that we had, called Mr. Vickery, whose job was to escort me with a barrow with my trunk on it and the various things I'd need, the 400 yards from the Warhouse down the bottom of Common Lane to the house where I boarded. And if we stop here, there, that's my room. The house was painted white like this while I was here. Yeah. And the housemaster, Cyril Butterwick, was very proud of the look of it. I got caned once, and I was beaten by the man who went on to become captain of the English cricket team, George Mann. And years later, I was signing albums, and I spotted him in the queue. And as he approached, his wife said in a very loud voice, "You probably don't remember my husband, George. He beat you when you were at Eton." And he was so embarrassed. Poor man. He said, I don't think we want to talk about that now. But,
so you got 6 of the best?
I had 6 of the best. I had a rather painful 6 of the best from another man, a boy who will be nameless, because and who I think was a little, ought really to have gone to see somebody about it. He used to enjoy it audibly, run across the room. It was only quite a small room, and he'd dash across, wielding the cane, grunting, and at every blow there was a grunt, like somebody, you know, like Agassiz serving at Wimbledon. But he drew blood.
Really?
Yeah, and I was tremendously proud of that.
Were you?
Oh, yes. I mean, it was painful at the time. I think I yelped. But afterwards, you know, everybody got shown my wheels. Ah. So there we are. Now, you see, they don't wear top hats now.
They don't wear top hats? It's terrible.
The only thing I found was very depressing. At the end of term, all my friends got on trains and went off to all these different homes. And I just went down the road, and the place was so dead. I used to get a terrible feeling of the opposite of homesickness. You know, where are they all gone? I'm here on my own.
But in your holidays, did you go around some of the stately homes of England and that sort of thing?
Yes, oh yes, because my mother's father was the Lord Lieutenant of Cambridgeshire and lived at Babram Hall. That was a huge building, a very aristocratic sort of scene altogether. I spent a lot of my young days undoing the top button of my trousers because the meals were there. There were 6 courses. Yeah, I can remember distinctly at the end of some of those meals feeling, you know, distinctly blown out.
When did you get your first trumpet?
1936.
Can you remember buying it? And why did you go for the trumpet?
The first person who was playing I was attracted to from recordings on the radio especially was Macanella, who's a Londoner of Italian descent, who was the first person in Britain to play trumpet in the style of Louis Armstrong, which led me to Louis Armstrong. And when I first heard Louis Armstrong, it was a definitive moment. Basin Street Blues, the 1929 version. I was absolutely bowled over by that. And to an extent, too, I used to see pictures of him, you know, with the trumpet, heraldic pictures. And I thought that that was the way you looked. I didn't realize that photographers always tilted the photo.
He never showed off his knowledge. He just wore his knowledge very lightly, but he knew everybody. And during the 50s and into the 60s, it was Humph really who had instigated getting the big American jazz stars over here, which of course I benefited from, you know, as a neophyte in jazz. So not only was it interesting talking to him about music and playing jazz, but also talking about the people whom he had got over here to the UK, and also because he played trumpet alongside them. So he could talk about conversations he'd had with Louis Armstrong and people like that. It was absolutely fascinating.
I was taken by my mother into Selma's in the Charing Cross Road. An apparition it must have been to them, with all these old hard-bitten old ex-dance band musicians who ran the shop. I went straight for the brass instruments. She trailed me around the clock, rather fruitlessly, saying, "Wouldn't a clarinet be nicer?" But I got the trumpet, and a man called Sim Saville gave me the 1-hour lesson or whatever it was that I got free with the trumpet. He started off by saying, I'll teach you the scale of C. And being, you know, an intolerable youth at the time, I said, "Oh, you mean this one?" because I'd worked it out. and played the scale. And at the end of the lesson, he said, "You'll go places," which I have, but not all the places that he was thinking of. Oh gosh, good heavens. That picture was painted, as you can see, back in the 1950s. I've never seen it before.
Shortly after Lyttleton left Eton, Britain declared war on Germany. Lyttleton and his cousin Anthony joined the Grenadier Guards.
I did a month on the Salerno beachhead, which was kind of condensed because I don't think I slept in a bed throughout that whole month. Then I got a cocktail of all the diseases. I got malaria, dysentery and jaundice all at the same time, which really put paid to my, active career.
VE Day was a good idea for you, though, wasn't it?
VE Day, yes, that was another thing.
You still had your trumpet?
Yes. I managed to get right up to the railings with the trumpet, and then there was a big surge when the royal family came out, so I started to play.
What did you play?
Roll Out the Barrel, in Louis Armstrong style. The funny thing was that was the whole proceedings were broadcast, and it picked up me playing Roll Out the Barrel.
When did you solidify the music into the Humphrey Lyttleton band? When did it become?
Oh, that was when I first started.
Yeah.
1948. And as such, I went to a big festival in Nice where Louis Armstrong heard me play. And actually, it was reported to me that he said, that boy is coming on. And which was encouraging. And it got me a bit of publicity back here.
Jazz was rock and roll. When you played jazz, and especially when you played the trumpet, you were the man. And Lyttleton had that cachet and had that grip on the audiences. And when rock and roll came in, it was like seeing a sun rising and a moon setting, because jazz disappeared. It didn't disappear altogether, not by a long way, but in terms of its public prominence, it faded and faded and faded away. But in its heyday, it was a very big thing. As an interviewee, he was a delight. I think he was amused to be on the programme because he used to send us up rotten. On the other hand, we were in good company. He sent most things up rotten. It was a very popular programme. He was a lovely man to work with, as you would expect. The only thing we missed out was we got no blue chip filth.
We present I'm Sorry I Haven't a Clue, and your chairman is Humphrey Lyttleton.
In 1971, you became the chairman of what became a radio institution. I'm sorry, I haven't a clue. How did that happen?
A phone call from David Hatch, who doubled as a BBC producer and as an actor. And he said, we're doing a pilot. And I said, oh, yes. And he said, well, will you do it? I said, yes, of course I will. Because you used to get a fee of a couple of £100. And the pilots, in my memory, used to be wafted upstairs to the upper echelons where they made big decisions, and it flushed down the plug hole. So I thought that was the end of it. In the following February, message suddenly came that they've picked up on the programme, so can you do it? Hello and welcome to I'm Sorry I Haven't a Clue. You join us on a visit to Sunderland in the fine county of Tyne and Wear. A settlement first appeared here in the 7th century when Vikings stopped off on their way to Greenland. The town was therefore called Sunderlund, being an old Norse word meaning who was reading the bloody map. I can remember driving in to the Playhouse Theatre when we were doing the first show, thinking, what on earth am I doing? I've got a perfectly good career of my own. I don't know what I'm going to expect it to do, or even whether I want to go on doing it. And I've hung on to that particular thought for the 30-something years, since 1972.
The innuendo makes Jonathan Ross look like Little Bo Peep.
I was nominated once as a national treasure or something or other in the Sunday Times magazine, and they had a little piece about me underneath the photograph, referring to me as, apart from being a trumpet player and broadcaster, purveyor of blue-chip filth to Middle England. And I'm intensely proud of that. As usual, record researcher Samantha went to fetch the team's records from the gramophone library earlier, where she found the kindly old archivist sampling wines for Christmas. He'd brought in a selection of French wines, but there wasn't much left by the time Samantha got there. So although she was disappointed he only had a Semillon, she...
Humph was very unassuming. He would just suddenly appear in rehearsals. He'd just wander in with a bemused smile on his face, as if to say, I can't really believe we're doing this all over again. But there was something about his bearing, and it's because he was very tall as well, and he did have a natural chairman quality about him, and he was sort of the headmaster in a way. And the beauty about it was that he was headmaster with anarchy built in. So every now and again, he would, for instance, he wouldn't say anything for a long time. I mean, this was a great use of radio. He wouldn't say anything for a long time, and the teams would be carrying on and coming up with all sorts of rubbish. And then somebody would say, Humph, would you like to adjudicate? Or Humph, are you still there? And then he'd pretend he'd either been asleep or he'd been doing the crossword or something like that. So the whole thing suddenly just collapsed as a piece of chairmanship, I suppose.
Hang on, I think my watch has stopped. Oh, no, it hasn't. I thought we were nearly finished.
Why do you think the I'm sorry, I haven't a clue, has become such a huge success and such a huge cult and reduces people to helplessness, as I know from my own experience?
It's one of those things that I sort of avoid sort of analysing too much, because I don't think there's any sort of reason that you can put your finger on, other than that we all enjoy it so much. And also, I think it's got that slight element of danger. What is, you want me to say, what is the strangest thing you've ever seen?
That should have a you've.
At this rate, we'll be going out live.
What is the strangest... should be you've ever seen.
Got bad news, Barry.
So you don't what is the strangest thing you've ever seen?
Perfect.
Instead of what it says here, what is the strangest thing you ever saw? Which means the same bloody thing. I started the band in 1948, and I always tell people proudly, and there's always one person out of 10 who is impressed by it, that I'm the only one who's been in it all the time.
Today, a lot of people, we go to college and we learn all these fancy licks and stuff, and what I'm learning more from this band is about playing melodies and improvising that. Yeah. And I think that's all coming from Humph, and it's about having fun as well. You know, he's on stage and he's having a great time, and it's kind of quite infectious.
That comes from 1957 or 8, the trumpet parts. I learned that in a few days. We made a few mistakes on it, and then once it's in my head, I can remember this, you know, forever, which is useful because I don't have to then take as if anybody puts music in front of me, I can't read it. That's why I've thrown it on the floor. I've toured the world, seen the sights, laughed and wept through 1,000 nights. But what stays with me in my memory is the sound of a sad, sweet song. Did we hear it first in a movie show or a cabaret when the lights were low? Do the where and how really matter now? Let them rest where lost dreams belong.